Hey folks, M here from Transformers and Video Games, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at part 3 of my G1 Transformers and Pre-Transformers collection series. If you're a fan of vintage Transformers, you're not going to want to miss this one. And as always, if you like what I'm doing on YouTube, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share my video. Alright folks, we're going to start this one off right by taking a look at the top shelf of my Transformers bookcase, which is where I keep my absolute favorite Generation 1 Transformers figure. This is of course G1 Megatron, and not only was this an awesome toy for 1984 standards, but Megatron was also an iconic cartoon villain from the 1980s. Next to the vintage toy, I've got the 16 special version of Megatron, which is actually the first time the toy was reissued since 1986, with the Goodbye Megatron gift set that came out in Japan. That set included Megatron and Starscream, and although it's expensive, I would like to add it to my collection one day. Now we'll move along to my next shelf, and I know this isn't technically a G1 Transformer, but this is my Batroid Valkyrie, which later became Jetfire, or Skyfire if you're going by the name in the G1 cartoon. Next to that, I've got Bone Crusher and Hook, which are a couple of G1 Constructicons. The Takara versions that I've got here are different from the North American ones in that they came in little boxes and not on card backs. Next to that, we've got a couple of third-party World's Smallest Transformers figures by a company called Just Eye Toys. From left to right, we've got Blitzwing, the gray version of Shockwave, and on the right, we've got Astrotrain. For anybody who's interested, the gray version of Shockwave and Astrotrain are limited to 500 pieces worldwide. These figures have excellent build quality, and they're ones that I would highly recommend to anybody who likes undersized G1 Transformers. Under that, I've got a boxed version of Galvatron. Now, Galvatron's one of those figures that I do think is a little bit underappreciated nowadays. It's actually a pretty solid toy. Now, speaking of underappreciated toys, on the left side here we've got G1 Rodimus Prime, which quite honestly isn't my favorite figure. I like him a lot more in alt mode. I think the robot mode is kind of weak, although I do like his little battle station. Now we'll just zoom in here on the price tag on the box. You can see that back in 1986 this figure would have cost $15.95 at this particular store. I wish I could say I paid that little for mine. Unfortunately, I bought mine off of eBay many years later. Now I know that everybody's familiar with G1 Devastator, but I'm guessing that not everybody's seen him in his original Diaclone color scheme. That's right, he wasn't always purple and green. This is actually a vintage knockoff box set of the Diaclone original Devastator. And I've got to say, it's an excellent quality set, and one that I'm really glad to have in my collection. Now having said that, I'm always keeping my eyes open for a vintage Diaclone Devastator set. Just unfortunately, I'm not interested in spending a few $1,000s on something like that, so unless I win the lottery, I think my knockoff set's gonna have to do. Now my idea for the next shelf was actually to display 3 versions of Blaster with very different color schemes. Just unfortunately, the pre-Transformers microchange version that I have comes in a box that didn't really fit in with the other 2 on the shelf, so I thought I'd go with Perceptor over here on the left. Now, Perceptor was actually difficult for me to find boxed. For some reason there seems to be an abundance of loose specimens, but for whatever reason I don't seem to see it boxed very often. Next we've got a couple more World's Smallest Transformers by Just Eye Toys. That's Blaster on the left and Twincast on the right. And under that we've got my G1 Blaster. This is a Canadian edition, so you can see his French name is Tempo, which I do think is an interesting translation of the name. And last but not least, on the right here we've got the Takara version of Twincast. As you can see in the little window there, Twincast comes packaged with steel jaw, and the number on the box in the upper right corner is C116. C stands for Cybertron. For anybody who's not familiar with this, in Japan the Autobots are known as Cybertrons, and the Decepticons are known as Destrons. I was extremely lucky to find somebody who was selling Twincast privately, so I didn't need to worry about things like eBay prices, the global shipping program, or even it getting lost or damaged in transit. Moving right along, I've got a really interesting figure on the next shelf. On the left side, you can see my Transformers Radio AM robot. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is a rare figure, but it is a fairly uncommon one. This was released in Argentina back in 1987, and it never saw a North American release. What makes this figure kind of unique is the fact that his head looks a lot like G1 Megatron's, whereas his body looks a lot like a knockoff version of G1 Blaster. What makes this figure really cool is that it is an actual working AM radio. Next to that, I've got my Generation 1 Sky Lynx. Now, I still have the original price tag on this particular box. Would you believe that back in 1986, Sky Lynx would have set you back $47.99? I know that doesn't sound like much from today's standards, but back in the 80s, that was extremely expensive for a toy like this. Sky Lynx did receive a Takara Encore Generation 1 reissue back in 2008, and it also got a classic style Generations release in 2016. I never ended up picking up the Generations version, but I do regret not getting it. It does look like a very cool figure. I don't know about anybody else, but I do think it would be very cool if we got a Titans class version of this character at some point in the future. Leave me a comment in the comment section, and let me know if that would be something that you'd be interested in getting as well. Next, I'm going to show you a couple of very cool Machine Robo figures. Now, I recognize that this series was supposed to focus mainly on G1 Transformers, but I do have a little extra space here, so I thought it wouldn't hurt to show off these two figures as well. On the left, we've got MR32, also known as GoBot Slicks, and on the right, we've got MR31, also known as GoBot Waterwalk. Well, I think these are very cool figures. In my opinion, they're nowhere near as cool as the figure underneath. This is everybody's favorite double spy, Punch-Counterpunch. Punch-Counterpunch received a Power the Primes release. Unfortunately for me, it was an Amazon exclusive, so I didn't have an opportunity to buy that one at retail, but it is something that I hope to rectify down the line by picking it up at a toy show in the future. Next, we'll take a look at my Generation 1 Metroplex. This is the American version, and it's also the version that comes with a free glow-in-the-dark movie poster inside. One little bit of advice would be that if you find those glow-in-the-dark movie posters for the right price, that being a couple of dollars, I'd highly recommend picking them up. They seem to be going for more and more money on the aftermarket nowadays, so those are definitely a good investment if you can find them for the right price. One unfortunate difference between the version of the figure that comes with the movie poster and the one that doesn't is the fact that the one that doesn't come with the poster comes with really nice chromed thighs, whereas my version here unfortunately comes with two chrome-colored stickers on his thighs. I would always prefer to have the extra chrome parts on my figures, but that's just how it goes sometimes. For anybody who's interested in getting a G1 Metroplex but who doesn't want to spend the extra money on a vintage set, my advice would be to look into getting the Takara Encore reissue. That version includes chrome thighs and rubber tires, but my only advice would be to do your homework first, because apparently there are knockoffs of the Encore version kicking around. Now we'll move along to what I have on top of my bookcases, starting here on the left with my favorite G1 Micromasters playset. This is of course G1 Countdown. The price on the sticker in the upper right corner of the box says $39.99 Canadian. Next we'll move along to G1 Jetfire, which is an excellent example of a toy that Hasbro licensed from another company back in the 80s in order to meet consumer demands. That's why it doesn't look anything like any of the other figures at the time. Speaking of toys that Hasbro licensed from other companies to fill out their Transformers line in the 80s, Omega Supreme is another great example of that. This was licensed to Hasbro by a company called Toy Box and went on to become a very popular toy and a very popular character in the G1 cartoon. It took me a while to find, but on the right here I do have a pre-Transformers original Toy Box version of Omega Supreme. This is Mechabot 1. Now, if you're interested in finding a figure like this, be very careful. There are a lot of knockoffs out there, but the original one will say Toy Box in the bottom left corner of the box. Speaking of the box, I absolutely love that artwork on the front. Here's a shot of all four of the figures on top of my shelves. Now, in case anybody's wondering, I actually use IKEA Billy bookcases. I've got a total of 3 of them. There's one half-size Billy bookcase in the middle, surrounded by 2 full-sized ones on the left and right. Now, I decided to buy glass doors after the fact, just because I wanted to keep the dust off my figures, and I also think it gives it kind of a museum look, which is kind of what I was going for here. One bit of advice, if you want to go the same route that I did and add glass doors to your Billy bookcases, would be to definitely anchor them to the wall and behind. They do become very front heavy when you add the glass doors, especially when you open them, so just for safety reasons, it's always a good idea to anchor them to the wall. Thank you very much for checking out part 3 of my G1 Transformers and Pre-Transformers collection series. If you haven't had an opportunity to do so, please check out parts 1 and 2. I'm eventually going to document my entire G1 Transformers collection in this series, so if you're a fan of vintage Transformers, you're definitely not going to want to miss these collection videos. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Take care.